Welcome to week 3 of Mpai 600 here at Georgetown University. Just announcements. Paper 1 is due right now. Yesterday, tonight, whenever you watch this. So just get it done. If there's a problem, please let me know. And on a similar note, you might notice I'm doing this in a different background than I usually do. I tested for the corona, so I've got the coronavirus. And a couple of things. One, I'm fine. I had symptoms a couple of days ago, high temperature, but I'm vaccinated and boosted, so it didn't really impact me too much. Which I should also just say, if you haven't, get vaccinated, which I think is a requirement. Get boosted, which is a soon-to-be requirement, because it might have been a lot worse had I not gotten those things. It also means that I might be out of the loop. My daughter tested positive as well, so I might be out of the loop for grading these papers. Usually I try to get them back in a few days, but it might take me a little bit longer given that everything is going on for me. So get vaccinated, get boosted. If there's one thing you take away from this. So review of last week. Again, we talked about requirements, integrated into the collection plan. Hopefully you're doing that right now. And then we talked about intelligence traps or analytical misjudgments, psychology of intelligence, which you'll get into in a future class. But I kind of hit the wave tops for this class. And I just want to cover a couple of the quick ones. Key issues, again, confirmation bias was one that we have seen, and we will see over and over and over again. We set on a course of action, and then we try and prove that course of action with new evidence, or we frame new evidence around that. And then there's mirror imaging. We tend to see our adversaries or competitors through our own lens and not through their own through the different lens. Again, we talk about Russia and Ukraine right now, and that's what's hot on the news. And we see that as a view of aggressiveness by Russia, and it is, but through his eyes, NATO expansion into Eastern Europe, even though we promised we wouldn't expand NATO into the former Warsaw Pact back in the 90s, he sees that as an act of aggression. What he fears, he doesn't really, we think he fears U.S. military force, nuclear weapons, what have you. That's not really what Russia fears. What Putin fears is angry crowds, angry mobs that threaten his power, crowds building in the street. That is his nightmare. That's what started the Arab Spring, and that's what starts the road to any dictator losing his grip on power. And oh, by the way, when they lose power, it usually doesn't end up with them going to, Mar-a-Lago or some nice resort after they leave the presidency. It usually ends up a lot uglier. So we look at things differently. You got to think what we're looking at your adversary's shoes. So, we do the mirror imaging. We do that even now in the Putin or the Russia-Ukraine crisis that's currently going on. But bringing back to the class, the confessions again. I hope you learned something, and I hope you were maybe even a little bit angered by it. A gross injustice brought on by some of these biases I just mentioned, and I'll just hit the high points. Classic confirmation bias to a ridiculous level. I'll let you determine if it was confirmation bias or it was something a little bit more sinister, but if you look at it at confirmation bias, they came on a theory and they went to extraordinary lengths to confirm the theory, to confirm that these 4 Navy sailors were a part of the rape and murder. Vividness bias. We saw that. We saw that in the confessions. We knew that Detective Ford knew that vividness bias would play in front of a jury. And you saw that, the way that when you listen to those confessions and you hear them talk, I broke into her and then I threw her on the ground and then I did X, Y, and Z and then I stabbed her. And then those confessions, even though it doesn't really, knowing we know about false confessions, but that vividness amongst the jury really sent those guys to their convictions. And Detective Ford knows that. He knows if he gets a conviction or gets a confession, that is going to sell a lot more than DNA evidence or any other of those normal aspects of a criminal investigation. Negative evidence. We talked about this in the last class, or in the you read about this. This is where we asked the question, who was guilty of this crime? What was not asked was, if you think these 4 people are guilty, why are we not seeing X, Y, Z? Why aren't we seeing a motivation? Why aren't we seeing a tight timeline? Why aren't we seeing DNA and trace evidence? Those questions weren't asked. The question that was asked was, who did this? Find me some guys so I can arrest. Not, if these guys did it, why are we not seeing all these other facets? Clientelism. We're going to talk about this in depth in future weeks. The prosecutors and the entire system, from the detectives to the prosecutors to the justice system, their client is, the people above them who are eventually go to, are elected by the people if they're prosecutors. And the people wanted a crime solved. They didn't want a rapist and a murderer out there doing whatever. They wanted a crime solved, and the detectives knew that, the prosecutors knew that, and they would go to great lengths to solve that crime. Not to bring justice, but to get a conviction. And that's a result, again, of clientelism. And then finally, 2 things I want you to take away. Georgetown values. This is a Catholic school. It's a Jesuit school. And I don't know if anyone here is Catholic or Jesuit or really cares. And I probably had very little factor in whether you wanted to come to Georgetown to begin with. But, we try and have an element of social justice in this curriculum, in this program. And you saw a gross injustice. Men in power abusing their office at the expense of these 4 innocent bystanders who lost years of their life. So one of the lessons is to kind of impart that many of you either work for or will be in those positions where you can arrest people, where you can put them away. And hopefully when you're in those positions, you're at least looking at it as a sense of justice, a sense of virtue. And while this documentary didn't cover the final justice, justice did not happen for the Norfolk 4 so the documentary ended in 2009 with them being released from prison, but they were still convicted sex offenders, etc. Their convictions weren't expunged until 2014, 2017, the last day that Terry McAuliffe was in office, when he was the governor previously. So that was January 2017. The last lawsuits weren't litigated until 2019. So 22 years after the incident, only were was there justice provided in these cases. So that's one thing to think about. And the last thing, and a student brought this up to me a couple of years ago, and it's resonated with me. This whole program, or this whole section, is about analytical bias. People suffering from confirmation bias, vividness bias, etc. The problem with it is good people suffer those biases. Good people, we all have our biases, and good people suffer from classic confirmation bias or confirmation bias, etc. Detective Ford was a bad person. He was an evil person. This isn't about bias. This is about a guy doing evil. That's a compelling argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, because it wasn't just a bad apple. It wasn't just Detective Ford. It was detective and juries and judges and prosecutors and appellate judges, all the way up to the governor's office, that participated in this mass injustice. But I'll let you decide. It's an interesting point of view. Good people suffer biases. This wasn't a good person. This was an evil person. And you saw what happened to Detective Ford later on. Was in jail. So that covers the week 2. Just preview week 3. We're going to move to kind of the historical points. So 2 case studies, strategic surprise, Pearl Harbor, and the Yom Kippur War. If you don't know anything about these, you could probably, the documentary will give it to you. There's plenty of documentaries on Pearl Harbor that you could watch as well. But when you're going through the documentary or you're reading about this, ask yourself, where were the failures? Were the failures in collection, analysis, policy interface, the policy maker failing to act, or were those just underlying circumstances, things that just happen? So we just went through what all these aspects were in the previous weeks. Now I want you to apply them to certain case studies and ask, where did the breakdown occur? And I want not necessarily your opinion, but your thoughts backed up by evidence. And the readings, again, the Dahl lays this out pretty well. The Yom Kippur War, the Bruce Riedel, and then the Al Jazeera, the Crossing. It's actually a 3-part, 3-part documentary, 1 hour each. You only have to watch really the first one. And on that, you only really need to watch the first 30 minutes. But the whole documentary is there for your own perusal. So if there's questions or issues, let me know, and I look forward to your discussions.